It was supposed to be a quiet discharge. Nothing dramatic, just the nurse's smile, a signature, and the freedom to breathe winter air again. "You're good to go, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice bright against the sterile hum of the ward. Outside, Christmas lights blinked weakly against the Seattle fog. Robert Hayes tightened his coat and walked out of the hospital, a man freshly stitched together, but already breaking somewhere deeper than any surgeon could reach. He didn't call Clara to tell her he was coming home early. He imagined she'd be waiting tree-lit dinner, warm her laughter filling the house like music. But when the cab turned onto their street, the only music he heard came from his own living room. A man's voice, Clara's laugh, and then silence, thick and final. He didn't move at first. The taxi meter ticked in red digits, and outside the frosted window his world folded in on itself. Through the sheer curtains, the glow of their Christmas tree danced across the glass. Two shadows moved together. Clara leaned in her head on someone's shoulder, her fingers resting where his should have been. Robert blinked once, slowly, the way soldiers do before pulling a trigger. But no shot came, only a steady exhale. He paid the driver, stepped out into the cold, and let the snow soak through his shoes. The front door was unlocked. That detail stuck with him later, how carelessly open his own house had been. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and betrayal. The living room flickered with candlelight. He saw them on the couch, Clara in her red sweater, a man with neatly parted hair and the kind of self-assured smirk that came from believing he'd gotten away with something. They were toasting with wine, laughing softly. His wife's wedding ring glinted in the firelight as she touched the other man's face. Robert didn't speak. He didn't even flinch. He watched for maybe 5 seconds, long enough to confirm what his gut had known for months. Then he turned around and walked out. The door clicked behind him, muffling the sound of Clara's laughter. On the street, the snow was falling heavier, erasing his footprints faster than he could make them. He called another cab voice, calm, almost detached. "Downtown," he said, when the driver asked where to. Inside the taxi, the city slid past like a film played too slowly. Storefronts glowed, people hurried with gifts in their arms, carolers sang under yellow light. The world kept celebrating, utterly indifferent to his silence. He pressed a hand to his chest, not where the stitches were, but lower where the ache had started. It wasn't pain exactly. It was vacancy, like someone had emptied him out. He thought of Clara's text from 2 nights ago, "Hospitals make me anxious. I'll see you when you're home, okay?" He had believed her, because that's what marriage was supposed to mean, believing. Now he wondered if she'd sent that message while lying beside the man he'd just seen. The cab driver looked at him in the mirror. "You all right, sir?" Robert met his eyes briefly. "Yeah," he lied. "Just a long week." He turned his gaze back to the window, watching the lights blur. The city was alive with family's laughter celebration. It all felt like static to him now, noise he could no longer tune into. As they crossed the Fremont Bridge, the reflection of the streetlights rippled on the water. Robert remembered how Clara used to love that view. "Looks like melted gold," she'd said once years ago, when love still had weight. Now it looked like fool's gold, beautiful, worthless. He unlocked his phone. No new messages, not even a Merry Christmas. He scrolled through their old photos instead, smiles on beaches, dinners, birthdays. Her hand always resting on his arm, like she owned the right to be there. Ownership. That was what betrayal took away. Not the love, the certainty. The driver's radio played Silent Night. The irony made him laugh under his breath. The song filled the car as Robert stared at the snow, at the faceless city, at nothing in particular. Somewhere between the verses, his thoughts sharpened into something new. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. He realized how quiet his life had become even before tonight. How often he'd eaten alone while Clara worked late. How many weekends she'd spent visiting her sister. How easily he'd accepted the distance as normal. Maybe the truth had been waiting all along, patient as the tide. He thought of the years he'd spent building their life, the house near Queen Anne Hill, the small engineering firm he'd grown from scratch, the savings account with both their names on it. He'd trusted her with everything, and she'd celebrated Christmas with someone else. Robert looked out the window at a row of office buildings, one of them still lit. He recognized the street. His oldest friend, Marcus Bell, had a law office there. Marcus, the man who'd pulled him out of debt after the recession, who'd drafted his will, who knew where every dollar of Robert's life sat. A small decision formed in his mind, quiet but absolute. The kind that changed the direction of everything without needing a single raised voice. He leaned forward. "Can you stop here?" The driver slowed near the curb. Robert handed him a bill and stepped into the night. The cold bit through his coat, but it felt right cleansing. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the sting of winter air, and looked up at the office windows, glowing faintly against the dark. Marcus would be home by now with his family. Robert didn't need him tonight. Not yet. He just needed a plan. He started walking toward a nearby diner, the only place still open. The bell above the door jingled as he entered. Warmth rushed at him, carrying the smell of coffee and fried eggs. A waitress smiled. "Merry Christmas, honey," she said. Robert nodded politely and sat by the window. His reflection stared back, pale, older, but steady. He pulled a napkin from the holder and began to write slow and deliberate change account access. "Call Marcus, Monday morning. Find proof. Breathe." The pen stopped. He looked at the list, then at his trembling hand. It wasn't fear. It was adrenaline, the body catching up to a truth the mind had already accepted. He folded the napkin and tucked it into his wallet. The waitress brought his coffee, and he thanked her quietly. Steam curled upward, fogging the window just enough to blur the city lights. He didn't think of Clara anymore. He thought of structure, order, clarity. The same way he used to design machines, one piece moving another, until the system corrected itself. By the time he finished his coffee, the trembling had stopped. He stood, left a tip, and stepped back into the cold. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing everything. White erasing footprints, mistakes, memories. He walked down the empty street, the city silent except for the faint echo of bells somewhere far off. His breath hung in the air like smoke, and for the first time that night, he felt a strange kind of relief. Not peace, not yet, but control. As he reached the corner, a single thought crossed his mind. Steady, final, unshakable. Tomorrow she'll still be celebrating Christmas. I'll be celebrating freedom. The cab hummed quietly as it cut through the sleeping city. Snow had turned to thin rain, streaking the windows like fingerprints of ghosts. Robert leaned back, eyes fixed on the blur of headlights, ahead the reflection of red and green traffic lights flashing across his face. The driver had stopped trying to make conversation. Silence had its own language tonight. He replayed every sound from the house. Clara's laugh, the man's voice, the clink of glasses. Then the door closing behind him, soft, deliberate, final. He thought of how easy it had been to leave, how natural. Like his body had already decided long before his mind did. The hospital discharge papers were still folded in his jacket pocket, warm from his palm. Recovered ahead of schedule, the nurse had said. Maybe the body was fine, but the rest of him was somewhere between numb and awake. He didn't check his phone. There were no messages anyway. For months now, their conversations had shrunk to reminders, logistics, and politeness. Pick up milk, dinner with the board, don't forget your pills. It had been a marriage of calendar notifications. Tonight simply revealed what had already expired. The taxi slowed near a red light. Outside, a couple hurried across the street, laughing under one umbrella. Their joy looked effortless, young, undeserved. Robert looked away. He remembered how Clara used to fill their home with noise, music, candles, dinner parties, laughter that reached every corner. Somewhere along the line, that sound had faded into phone calls she took in other rooms, work trips that stretched too long, and a kind of distance that didn't make sense until tonight. He could almost trace the moment when love turned into habit and habit into silence. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Long night, huh?" Robert forced a faint smile. "Longest in a while." "You headed home?" "No," he said after a pause. "Not tonight." The light turned green. The car rolled forward, tires hissing against wet pavement. He thought of how predictable he had become. Same work hours, same morning coffee, same seat at the dinner table waiting for someone who rarely came home on time. Maybe it wasn't betrayal that hurt most. Maybe it was realizing how replaceable he had made himself. He pulled his wallet out, not to pay, but to take out the folded napkin from the diner earlier. 4 words stared back at him. Change account access. Call Marcus. Find proof. Breathe. Simple, clear, mechanical. The kind of list that made chaos feel solvable. He looked out the window at the skyline of Seattle fading behind them. The city was quiet under the drizzle. In that stillness, an odd thought surfaced. Clara might have already replaced him in every way that mattered. Not just emotionally, financially, legally. The house, the joint savings, the investments under both their names. He'd handed her every password, every document. Trust had been his default setting. That ended tonight. He reached for his phone, scrolling through contacts, until he found Marcus Bell. Office. His finger hovered above the screen. Marcus was the kind of man who saw the world in contracts and loopholes, not emotions. He would know exactly what to do. But it was 1:17 a.m. Robert hesitated. Then he pressed call. The phone rang 3 times. A groggy voice answered. "Robert, are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, though his voice sounded far away, even to himself. "You're supposed to be recovering." "Why are you calling at Jesus 1 in the morning? I need to see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow's Christmas." "I know." A pause. Then Marcus's tone changed, sharper, alert. "What happened?" Robert stared at the rain-streaked window. "She's not alone tonight." Another pause. "You're sure I saw them?" "Christ, Rob. I'm not calling for sympathy. I just need your help." Marcus sighed, the kind that meant both worry and resignation. "All right. Come by the office at 9. We'll figure this out. Don't do anything stupid until then." "I won't," Robert said. "I already did everything I needed to." He ended the call before Marcus could respond. The driver glanced back again. "Everything all right?" Robert nodded slowly. "It will be." The taxi merged onto the highway, heading toward the downtown district. The rain blurred everything, the skyline, the road, the future. Robert watched droplets slide down the glass, merging into small rivers that disappeared at the window's edge. He thought about the life he'd built, every piece of it shared with Clara. Their mortgage, her car lease, the business she'd helped him register. Everything they owned was woven together like threads, and she had cut through it without hesitation. He pressed his hand against his chest again. Not because of the incision, but because of the calm settling inside him. There was no shaking, no rage, just clarity, the kind that comes when a man finally stops lying to himself. He remembered the first Christmas they spent together years ago. Clara had surprised him with an old pocket watch engraved with his initials. She'd said, "For when time finally belongs to you." He hadn't understood it then. Tonight he did. Time was the only thing she could no longer touch. The cab took the exit near 3rd Avenue. Robert glanced at the law building ahead, dark, except for one window where Marcus's assistant had probably left a desk lamp on. He smiled faintly at the coincidence. Maybe even the universe works overtime for paperwork, he murmured. He paid the driver and stepped out. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. The city around him was asleep, but he felt more awake than he had in years. He walked slowly toward the small park across the street and sat on a bench facing the water. The surface shimmered under the distant city glow. He sat there breathing, counting every exhale like it was proof he still existed outside of Clara's orbit. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the soldier in him, disciplined, patient, precise, started taking inventory. What he had, what he'd lost, what he could rebuild. That part of him had always been quiet, but never gone. A text buzzed on his phone. "Clara, where are you? You're scaring me." He stared at the screen. The irony almost made him laugh. "Clara, please, Robert, call me. This isn't what you think." He locked the phone without replying. She'd find out soon enough what he thought. Across the water, a ferry's horn echoed low, distant, steady. He closed his eyes and let the sound settle in his chest. For the first time, the noise didn't hurt. It just was. He opened his eyes, pulling out the napkin again, reading the last line. Breathe. He did. Long, deliberate, measured. Each breath a reminder that control had shifted back to him. The drizzle turned to a fine mist. The Christmas lights on the buildings across the bay, reflected in the ripples, red, green, gold. He thought about how many Christmases he had left, and how he refused to spend another one apologizing for someone else's lies. He would start again. Not with anger, not with destruction, with precision. He took one last look at the city before standing up. The skyline gleamed like a battlefield seen from afar, quiet now, but full of ghosts. He turned toward the empty street. Tomorrow Marcus would help him map out the next steps, the accounts, the legal transfers, the documentation. The strategy was already forming piece by piece. As he walked back toward the cab stand, his reflection flashed in every shop window. Older, yes, but resolute. The man who had left the hospital that morning had been broken. The man walking now was rebuilding. His phone buzzed again. 36 missed calls. He smiled faintly, slipping it back into his pocket. The rain washed over him as he whispered into the quiet street. Tomorrow she can keep the Christmas lights. I'm taking back everything else. Marcus Bell's office smelled like old paper and black coffee. The kind of place where truth never arrived, dressed in comfort. It was barely sunrise, the city still gray and half asleep, but the lights in his building were already on. Robert stood by the door, his breath visible in the cold air. He knocked twice, then pushed it open. Marcus looked up from behind his desk, startled. "Robert, Jesus, you look like hell." "I've looked worse," Robert said, hanging his coat on the rack. His hospital bracelet still clung loosely to his wrist, the plastic dull against his skin. "You're supposed to be in recovery." "I am." He sat down. "Just not from what they think." Marcus studied him for a long moment. The years of friendship between them didn't require questions, but this was different. He finally asked, "What happened?" Robert reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. He placed it on the desk without a word. Marcus opened it, frowning at the pages. Inside, bank statements, account summaries, copies of property deeds. "You brought me homework." "Evidence," Robert corrected. "Of what's coming next." Marcus sighed, setting the papers down. "Tell me." Robert looked past him toward the window where the first hint of dawn spilled across the skyline. "I came home last night. Early. Clara didn't know. And she was with someone, in our house. Christmas lights, wine, the whole performance. The silence that followed was heavy enough to press against the walls. Marcus rubbed a hand over his jaw. "You saw it yourself? Every detail. Do you know who Ethan Cole?" Robert said, flatly. "Professor. She mentioned him once, called him a mentor." Marcus exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, Rob. Don't be. His voice was even, almost clinical. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for control. That line changed everything. Marcus leaned forward, sensing the shift. What are you planning? I want the accounts sealed. The house transferred. Every key she's holding, I want it to stop turning. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's swift. Swift is the only language betrayal understands. He reached for one of the papers. It was a ledger showing deposits from his engineering firm into their joint account. You've been moving money already, Marcus noted. For months, Robert said. Something didn't feel right. She stopped asking how the business was doing, stopped caring. So I opened a separate trust, Hayes Engineering Holdings. Everything important is under that name now. Marcus smiled faintly. You always were one step ahead. No. Robert corrected. This time I just stopped pretending not to see the signs. Marcus stood, walked to his cabinet, and poured 2 coffees. He handed one across the desk. So, what's the play? Robert took a sip, his hands steady. First, freeze all joint accounts. She'll wake up broke. Second, file for asset protection before the divorce petition. Third, prepare a restraining order just in case she tries to use what's left against me. Marcus tilted his head. You sound like you've rehearsed this. 3 hours alone in a taxi will do that. For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked. The office heater clicked softly in the background. Marcus finally said, Most men in your position lose their heads. You're sitting here talking strategy. Robert looked at him, eyes sharp. Anger makes mistakes. I'm done making those. Marcus nodded slowly, the respect in his expression replacing pity. All right, let's start with the accounts. He pulled out his laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard. You still have full power of attorney from when we handled the firm's expansion? Yes. Good. That'll make the transfers clean. He typed, clicked, printed. One by one, documents came out of the machine like quiet verdicts. Sign these, Marcus said. Robert signed each one deliberately, his handwriting neat and unhurried. When he finished, Marcus gathered the papers into a folder and exhaled. That's it. By this evening, she won't be able to touch a cent. Robert leaned back, studying the papers like they were blueprints. You know, I used to think marriage was a kind of insurance. You build, you trust, you share. Turns out it's a joint account with an emotional clause. Marcus smirked. You're getting poetic. Should I be worried I'm just remembering who I was before I spent years apologizing for being careful? He stood and walked to the window. The rain had started again, tapping against the glass. Below the city came alive cars, commuters, morning life. He could almost feel distance growing between himself and the chaos. Marcus broke the silence. What about the house? I'll have the locks changed by noon, Robert said. Already called a contractor last night. Security system too. New codes, new access list. She won't even get a notification. That's cold. That's necessary. He turned back to Marcus. I need you to file everything today. Divorce papers, trust protections, whatever it takes. She won't expect me to move this fast. Marcus nodded. Consider it done. Make sure all notifications go through you. I don't want her tracing anything back to me until it's finished. You're going dark then. Robert smiled faintly. Exactly. Marcus hesitated. You want me to arrange temporary housing? Somewhere quiet, already handled. Rented a place near the marina under the company name. No one knows I'm there. Marcus sat back, shaking his head. You thought of everything. I had all night, Robert said. Besides, clarity's a hell of a stimulant. He walked over to the desk again, resting a hand on the folder. She thought I was weak, that I'd break down. But she never understood. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means patient. Marcus studied him carefully. You're not just protecting yourself. You're planning something bigger. Robert met his gaze. No, I'm just ensuring consequences. For a moment their eyes held. Then Marcus smiled a slow curve of admiration. You know, I've seen men lose everything in divorces, but I've never seen someone dismantle a betrayal with this kind of precision. Precision's what I'm good at, Robert said. That's why I built machines instead of excuses. The printer whirred again. Marcus slid one last document toward him, a summary of asset realignments. Robert signed without hesitation. Marcus set the pen down. So what now? Robert slipped the signed papers into his coat. Now I go home. To confront her, he shook his head. To remove what's left of her from my life. Quietly. Marcus leaned back, watching his friend with something between awe and concern. You're not destroying anything, Rob. You're dismantling it like a blueprint. Robert looked at him with calm certainty. Exactly. I built the life. I can rebuild it without her. He walked to the door, stopped, and turned slightly. One more thing, don't call me until everything's filed. You sure you don't want updates? No. Surprises are her thing, not mine. Marcus chuckled softly. You've changed. Robert nodded. No. I just stopped negotiating with disrespect. He opened the door, the hallway light spilling across his face. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The world smelled new again, washed clean. Marcus called out as Robert stepped away, Merry Christmas, Rob. Robert paused, half smiled. It is now. He left the building without looking back. The street was quiet, the air sharp with winter. He pulled his coat tighter. Feeling the weight of the documents against his chest, proof of preparation, of control, of freedom in progress. As he walked toward the corner, his phone buzzed again. Clara's name flashing across the screen. He didn't even glance at it. He silenced the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and kept walking. The wind carried faint music from somewhere, a street performer, maybe playing an old jazz tune on a saxophone. The melody curved through the cold air, lonely and pure. Robert smiled to himself, the kind of smile that comes not from joy, but from knowing the worst is finally over. He reached the intersection, waited for the light to change, and whispered under his breath, "This isn't revenge. This is reclamation." Then he crossed the street, vanishing into the city's quiet pulse. The man Clara once underestimated, now moving with the precision of someone who finally remembered what dignity felt like. The snow had hardened overnight, layering the street like glass when Robert's truck rolled to a stop in front of the house he no longer called home. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the Christmas lights still blinked weakly across the porch railing. He stepped out, his breath clouding in the cold, and stared at the place he'd built with his own hands. For a moment, he just stood there, keys dangling between his fingers. Then he unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale with the sweetness of leftover wine and perfume. Candles melted to puddles on the coffee table. The couch cushions were rumpled, the throw blanket tossed aside. A champagne bottle sat half empty beside two glasses. The room still smelled of them, Clara, and the man she thought would never be found out. Robert closed the door softly behind him. Every creak in the floorboard felt exaggerated, like the house itself was listening. He walked to the mantel and turned off the twinkling lights. Darkness returned sharp and honest. He took a slow breath and began the work. First, the locks. A locksmith would arrive within an hour, but he started removing the spare keys himself, the one hidden under the garden frog statue, the one taped behind the garage outlet. He found the extra house key in the drawer with the batteries. Everything she thought was secret had been routine. By 7 a.m., he was on the phone with Marcus. "She's still asleep?" Marcus asked. "She's wherever liars hide when the sun comes up," Robert replied. "You want me to finalize the lock changes today, by noon?" Next came the alarm system. He logged into the security portal on his laptop, the same system he had installed last year when Clara said she didn't feel safe. He reset the passwords, erased her user profile, and changed the emergency code from her birthday to a string of numbers only he would remember, coordinates from the first military base he ever served. It felt symbolic. A man reclaiming ground once lost. The quiet in the house wasn't peace. It was precision. He walked through each room methodically, office, kitchen, bedroom, collecting what was his. What mattered? Files. External hard drives, his father's pocket watch. The wedding photo came last. He looked at it for a long time before setting it face down on the dresser. At 9, a white van pulled into the driveway. The locksmith, bundled in a thick jacket, waved. "Morning, Mr. Hayes. Changing everything, right?" "Every door," Robert said. "No copies for anyone but me." The man nodded, tools clattering as he got to work. While the locks were replaced, Robert made another call to the bank. "This is Robert Hayes," he said calmly. "I need to restrict access to all joint accounts immediately. Yes, both checking and savings. No, my spouse no longer has authorization." The banker's voice was polite, cautious. "Can I ask the reason for the freeze, sir? Unauthorized activity?" Robert said, steady as a pulse. He could hear the typing on the other end. "Done. You'll receive confirmation emails within the hour. Thank you." He hung up, looked out the window. The locksmith was finishing the front door, testing the new bolt. The sound of metal clicking into place was satisfying, like punctuation after a long, senseless sentence. By the time he sat down at the kitchen counter, the first confirmation email arrived, access revoked. Account holder change completed. He sipped his coffee and allowed himself a rare smile. One by one, the pieces shifted into place. Around 11, he called the car dealership. "This is Robert Hayes. I'm terminating the lease on the Lexus under my name." "Yes, the white SUV. I'll authorize the retrieval team to collect it from the listed address this afternoon." Clara would come home to find her key useless, her bank card declined, her car gone. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt steady. At noon, the locksmith finished. "All set, Mr. Hayes. New keys, new deadbolts. Shouldn't take long to get used to the locks." "I already am," Robert said, handing him payment and a firm handshake. When the van drove off, silence filled the house again, except now it belonged to him. He opened his laptop, the hum of the fan the only sound. Daniel Ortiz's name appeared on his screen. Robert typed quickly, "Need you to retrieve data from Clara's cloud and email accounts. Full backup. Priority." Daniel replied within minutes. "On it. You'll have a drive by tonight." Robert leaned back, eyes tracing the ceiling. He remembered when trust had been automatic, when his home had been a refuge instead of a crime scene. That version of him had died quietly, somewhere between the first lie and the last apology. He picked up his phone. 36 missed calls from Clara. The first started just after sunrise, the last 20 minutes ago. He didn't play the voicemails. He didn't need to hear her panic. The silence said more than any excuse could. By evening, the courier arrived with a small encrypted drive. Daniel's note read, "Recovered everything." Emails, messages, photos. "It's bad, man. You were right." Robert stared at the package for a while before opening it. The flash drive glinted like something dangerous. He plugged it in and opened the first folder. Conversations. Dozens of them. "Can't wait for tomorrow. You make me feel alive again." He's boring. Predictable. He scrolled further, photos at a hotel bar, receipts for dinners charged to their joint card. His name printed across every proof of betrayal. He didn't react. No shaking hands. No shouting. Just a long exhale. Then he copied everything to a secure archive, encrypted it, and sent the file to Marcus with a single line. Evidence secured. Phase 1 complete. Then he closed the laptop. The day was nearly gone. Outside, the snow had started falling again, soft and slow, blanketing the world in quiet indifference. Robert stood by the window, looking out at the fading light. Somewhere, Clara was realizing the weight of her actions, the frozen accounts, the car repossession, the locked doors. He imagined her confusion first, then the fear, then the anger. She would call. She would demand. She would cry. And he would remain unreachable. He picked up his mug from the counter, now cold, and carried it to the sink. His reflection in the kitchen window looked older, but lighter. There was something almost peaceful about it. He whispered, mostly to himself, "People expect shouting after betrayal. They don't understand. The real revenge is silence." His phone buzzed once more. A message from Marcus. "All assets secure. Tomorrow we file." Robert typed back, "Good. Let's keep it quiet." He slipped on his coat, locked the new door behind him, and stepped out into the snow. The air was sharp, clean, almost pure. He pulled his gloves tight and walked toward his truck, the crunch of ice under his boots sounding like closure. When he started the engine, the radio came alive, mid-song, an old tune from the 70s, about starting over. He let it play. The headlights cut through the dark street, illuminating flakes falling like ash. As he pulled away from the curb, the house shrank in his rearview mirror, small, dark, sealed. He didn't look back. In his mind, he could almost hear Clara's voice, angry, frightened, pleading. But over it all came another voice, his own, quiet and final. "This isn't rage. It's restoration." He drove toward the highway, the city opening before him like a clean page, the storm behind him erased by snow and time. And for the first time in years, Robert Hayes smiled, not because he'd won, but because he'd finally stopped losing. The morning after the locks were changed, Clara Hayes stood on the porch with a coffee cup in one hand and her phone in the other, trying to convince herself that everything was fine. The key turned once, then jammed. She tried again. Nothing. The cold bit through her gloves. She forced a shaky laugh. "Come on," she muttered. "Don't start this today." Inside, nothing moved. No light, no sound. She leaned her forehead against the door, the smell of pine wreaths and stale wine mixing in the December air. "Robert," she called, but her voice came out small. Across town, Robert sat in a cafe by the marina, watching the steam curl off his coffee. Through the window, the harbor cranes looked like silent sentinels against a pale sky. He checked his phone. Marcus had texted, "All accounts officially frozen. Vehicle recovery confirmed." Robert replied with a single word, "Understood." He set the phone face down. The radio behind the counter played something soft, the kind of music people used to fill silence when they couldn't bear it. He didn't need it. The silence was his. Back at the house, Clara tried the garage door next. The remote clicked, no response. What the hell? She walked around the side, tried the back door. Nothing. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contact, until she found Robert's name. She hit call. The first ring went through. The second, the third. Then voicemail. "Robert, it's me. The keys aren't working. I don't know if something broke or just call me, okay?" She hung up, waited, called again, then again. 36 calls later, the only response was the sound of her own voice repeating itself through the automated system. A neighbor's front door creaked open. Mr. Jensen, in his robe and slippers, stepped onto his porch. "Everything all right, Clara?" She straightened quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, just locked myself out." "Need a hand?" "No, thank you. I'll sort it out." He hesitated, watching her try the lock one more time, then nodded and went back inside. Through his window, his wife whispered, "Told you something was wrong with that marriage." Robert stirred his coffee slowly, watching the sugar dissolve. He opened his laptop. The home security camera feed came to life, a series of still images cycling every few seconds. There she was, standing in the cold, fumbling with the keys, calling, pacing. Her frustration grew visible frame by frame. He muted the notifications. Marcus's voice echoed in his head from their call last night. "Are you sure about this? It's going to break her," Robert had answered. "She already broke it. I'm just closing the book." Clara sat down on the porch step, her breath fogging in front of her. Her phone buzzed. Card declined at gas station. She frowned, checked her banking app, and froze. Account unavailable. She dialed the number for customer service, her tone rising. There must be some mistake. Yes, the joint account Robert Hayes and Clara Hayes. What do you mean it's restricted? Ma'am, the voice on the other end said. Calm and practiced, access to that account has been suspended pending authorization from the primary holder. I am the primary holder, she snapped. I'm sorry, ma'am, but our records list Mr. Hayes as the sole authorized user as of this morning. The line clicked dead. She lowered the phone, staring at the black screen as if it might explain itself. Then anger bloomed where confusion had been. She grabbed her purse, yanked out her wallet, 3 credit cards, all his name first, hers second. She tried the first. Declined. The second. Declined. Son of a bitch, she whispered. Robert finished his coffee, left a generous tip, and stepped outside. The wind off the bay was sharp enough to sting, but he didn't mind. He walked along the pier, the boards creaking beneath his boots. Somewhere, seagulls screamed over a fishing boat. His phone buzzed again, Clara's name flashing across the screen. He watched it for a full 10 seconds before pressing the side button and silencing it. It buzzed again immediately. Then again. He turned off the ringer completely. Back at the house, Clara pounded on the door. Robert, this isn't funny. She waited, breathing hard. I know you're in there. Don't do this. Her voice cracked. She hit the door once more, then slumped against it, shivering. From inside Mr. Jensen's window, his wife whispered, She's been out there for an hour. Let her cool off, he said, sipping his tea. By the afternoon, Clara's fury had melted into panic. She sat on the porch, scrolling her messages, trying Ethan. The call went to voicemail. She tried again. Finally, he picked up. Clara. His tone was clipped. Ethan, something's wrong. Robert, he's frozen. The account's changed the locks. I can't get into the house. Wait, Ethan said, his voice dropping. You're saying he knows I think so. He saw us. I don't know how, but he knows. Jesus Christ, what am I supposed to do? Don't drag me into this, Clara. What, I can't talk right now. Ethan. The line cut off. She stared at the phone like it had betrayed her too. Robert parked his truck across the street 2 houses down. From there he could see the porch. Clara was pacing again, talking to herself, her hair sticking to her face from melted snow. He didn't roll down the window. He just watched. Marcus's black SUV pulled up beside him. Marcus leaned over the passenger seat. You sure you want to be here for this? I'm not here for her, Robert said. I'm here to make sure it's done. Marcus handed him a paper cup of coffee. The dealership confirmed pickup. Her car's being towed in an hour. Robert nodded, eyes still on the house. Clara noticed the tow truck before it even stopped. What are you doing? She shouted, running toward the driver. Ma'am, this vehicle's under repossession per the contract holder's request. I'm the contract holder. No, ma'am, the driver said gently. You were the co-signer. She froze as the realization settled in. The driver climbed into the SUV and pulled away. Leaving tire tracks in the slush, across the street, Marcus watched her collapse onto the porch, head in her hands. You got what you wanted, he said quietly. Robert sipped his coffee, his eyes unreadable. No, I got what she earned. They sat there in silence while the last daylight faded. Clara's phone buzzed in her lap. She looked down, saw another decline notification. Her lips moved, whispering something neither man could hear. Marcus finally spoke. "You could go home now." Let her scream. Robert shook his head. "Not yet. She still thinks she can fix it." He watched as Clara stood, tried the doorknob again, knocked once, softer this time. "Please, Robert," she said. "I made a mistake." Her voice cracked on the word, mistake. Marcus turned to him. "She's crying." Robert nodded once. That's the sound of realization. They sat a little longer. The cold began to fog the windshield, and Robert reached for the wipers. As the glass cleared, he saw Clara still on the porch, shoulders shaking. He didn't look away, but he didn't feel triumph either. Just distance, the kind that separates before and after. He set the empty coffee cup down in the holder and started the engine. Marcus looked at him. "You done for now. She's going to call you. She already has." As they pulled away, Clara lifted her head at the sound of the car engine, as if sensing him even without seeing. But by the time she stood up, the SUV had turned the corner taillights, fading into the gray. Robert didn't look back. The city lights came into view ahead of them, reflecting off the wet streets. Marcus drove in silence until Robert spoke, voice low but certain. "She thought betrayal made her powerful," he said. "But power's never about control. It's about consequences." Marcus nodded. "So what happens now?" Robert stared out the window. "Now, we finish what we started. Tomorrow she'll learn that silence isn't mercy. It's a message." The car disappeared into the snow-lit street, leaving behind a house that no longer belonged to Clara Hayes, and a silence so deep it echoed louder than any argument ever could. The cabin by the marina smelled faintly of salt and coffee when Robert woke before dawn. He hadn't slept much. The city was quiet outside his window, fog hanging over the water like a veil. But his mind was sharp, steady. The screen of his laptop glowed on the table, waiting. He opened it and began reading through the files Daniel had recovered from Clara's accounts. There were hundreds emails, messages, receipts. Every line was a brick in the wall of deceit he had already seen with his own eyes. But now the picture was complete. She hadn't just lied. She'd financed her lies with his money. Hotel stays, restaurant bills, flight tickets to Vancouver labeled professional workshop. Each receipt carried both their names, the husband funding his own betrayal. He kept scrolling each document, another cut he didn't feel anymore. The pain had calcified into clarity. At the top of the list, one name repeated, Cole Consulting LLC. He clicked the attachment. A payment transfer of $2,850 fee from their joint savings account, memo line, research assistance. He leaned back, smirking bitterly. "Assistance," he muttered. The phone on the table buzzed. Marcus. "Morning," Robert said. "You sound awake." "I am. Daniel sent me copies of the files." "It's bad. I've seen worse," Robert replied. "It's organized." "That's good." "Good?" Marcus asked, half laughing. "Evidence should always be tidy." He sipped his coffee. Steam curled against the window. "We move forward today. File the discovery paperwork. I want every withdrawal recorded, every fraudulent transfer marked." Marcus hesitated. "You sure you want to go this route?" "Once it's filed, there's no going back." Robert's tone was even. She never looked back. "Why should I?" He opened another folder labeled Photos. It was worse than he expected. Clara and Ethan at a lakeside resort, arms around each other, her wearing the necklace he'd bought for her 50th birthday. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then dragged the entire folder into the evidence archive and closed it. "Send everything to the secure drive," Marcus said through the phone. "I'll prep the financial report by noon. You still want to include the VA fund discrepancy?" "Yes," Robert said. "She used that money. She'll answer for it. That could turn criminal." "I'm aware." He hung up and leaned forward, rubbing his temples. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady as his pulse. By mid-morning, he was parked outside Marcus's office again. The city was waking up: commuters, buses, kids with backpacks, everyone moving in their little patterns of oblivion. Robert carried a small folder under his arm, the drive tucked inside. Marcus greeted him with 2 coffees. "You look better," he said. Robert smiled faintly. "Preparation's good for the soul." They sat. Marcus opened the folder, flipping through pages. "You've got every transaction documented. She was siphoning funds for months. And this Cole Consulting transfer, it's her lover's shell company. I ran it." "I figured," Robert said. "You're building a strong case for both divorce and fraud. This could take her down professionally." "Not good," Robert said. "Will." Marcus exhaled. "You're serious about the HR report too?" "Absolutely. The university prides itself on integrity. Let's see how they handle theirs being compromised." "You know, this isn't about money anymore." Robert nodded. "It never was. It's about truth. And truth doesn't whisper, it documents." They worked quietly for hours. Signatures, stamps, digital confirmations. Each step was another line drawn between his past and his peace. When they finished, Marcus leaned back. "All right, it's ready to file. But I have to ask, you plan to confront her after this?" Robert's eyes hardened. "Confrontation is noise. I prefer results." He left the office just before lunch. The air was bright but cold sunlight cutting through the winter haze. He walked to his truck, hands in his pockets, and let himself breathe for a moment. The city didn't know the world didn't care. But somewhere between the courthouse filing and his next inhale, he realized he wasn't angry anymore. Just done. That afternoon, Clara sat in her temporary apartment, the kind you rent month to month because you don't plan to stay. Her phone rang. It was the university's HR department. "Mrs. Hayes, this is a courtesy call. We've received an anonymous report regarding conduct concerns. We'll need to schedule a meeting tomorrow morning." Her heart dropped. "What kind of report? I'm afraid we can't discuss the details until you're present." The line clicked off. Across town, Robert received a short email confirmation. "Report received by Office of Academic Integrity and HR. Investigation initiated." He closed his laptop, the faintest hint of satisfaction flickering in his chest. Not joy, not revenge, just completion. He poured himself another cup of coffee and stared out at the harbor. The gulls circled lazily over the water. Everything moved as it always had. The world didn't pause for heartbreak or justice. It simply rotated, indifferent but fair. By early evening, Marcus called again. "Everything's filed. Legal protection, financial restrictions, restraining notice, all official. She can't touch anything that's yours." "Good," Robert said quietly. "Next step," Robert smiled. "Let the truth do the rest." He opened his notebook, the same one he'd started on that diner napkin days ago. He added a line beneath his last note, Phase 3 complete. He thought back to the night he'd walked into that living room, the lights, the wine, her laughter. It was strange how distant it felt now, like a scene from someone else's life. His hand didn't shake. His pulse didn't spike. He was calm in a way that almost frightened him. He stood by the window watching the marina lights shimmer on the water. The reflections reminded him of the engineering drawings he used to make precise, layered, deliberate. Every piece fitting exactly where it should. His life was finally like that again, structured, unbroken. The phone buzzed once. A new message from Clara. "I don't know what you've done, but everything's falling apart. Please, can we just talk?" He typed a response, paused, then deleted it. There was nothing left to say. A second message arrived. "Robert, please. I never meant for it to go this far." He closed the messages and locked the screen. Words meant nothing to people who had spent them carelessly. Outside, the tide rolled in, slow and certain. Robert opened the window slightly, letting the air in. Somewhere far off, church bells rang, marking the hour. He sat back down, grabbed a pen, and began outlining his next move, not against her, but toward his future. Phase 4, closure. Under it, he wrote 3 bullet points: review foundation proposal with Marcus, transfer restitution payments into trust account, no contact ever. He underlined the last one twice. The sky dimmed over the harbor. Boats swayed against their moorings, ropes creaking in rhythm with the tide. He felt an unexpected peace settle in his chest. For the first time in years, he had nothing to defend, nothing to justify. He turned off the lamp, the laptop screen glowing for a moment longer before going dark. The reflection of his face lingered faintly in the glass, older but unburdened. As he prepared for bed, he caught himself whispering, not out of anger, but acknowledgement, she'll find out tomorrow. And when she does, she'll finally understand what silence can build. He lay back listening to the soft rhythm of the water outside. The world was quiet again, his kind of quiet. And in that stillness, Robert Hayes finally allowed himself to close his eyes, not to escape but to rest in the certainty that every move, every line, every quiet act had brought him exactly where he needed to be. The email was already in his drafts when the sun came up. Robert read it one last time before clicking send. No dramatic wording, no bitterness, just documentation. To Office of Academic Integrity, North Seattle University Subject Report of Inappropriate Conduct, Faculty Member and Administrator. Attached supporting evidence, correspondence, financial transactions. He added one final line at the end, for review under university policy regarding professional ethics. Then he hit send. The small whoosh of the outgoing message sounded louder than it should have. He sat back, exhaled, and let the silence swallow the room. Somewhere outside the harbor was waking up boat engines, rumbling gulls, calling fog, thinning into daylight. It was just another morning in Seattle. But for 2 people, it was the beginning of their collapse. By noon, Marcus called. "They'll act fast," he said. "Universities hate scandals." "That's why I chose them as the audience," Robert replied. "You're sure about this?" She built her reputation on policies she never followed. Time to let her hear her own rules read back to her. He hung up, closed the laptop, and went for a walk along the pier. Every step felt measured. The world didn't look any different. Same cold wind, same gray water, but his place in it had shifted. For the first time in months, he felt steady enough to breathe fully. Across town, Clara walked into the university's admin building with her usual polished smile hair tied neatly, coat pressed. But something was wrong. The stares were sharper today. Conversations died as she passed. Her assistant Anna greeted her too quickly, too nervously. "Morning, Mrs. Hayes," she said, fumbling a stack of papers. "Morning. Everything all right?" "Yes, ma'am." The answer came too fast. At 10 past 10, her office phone rang. "This is HR," a voice said. "Mrs. Hayes, could you come upstairs, please? Conference room 2B. "Of course," Clara said, forcing her voice steady. She smoothed her jacket, dabbed at her lipstick, and climbed the stairs. When she entered, 2 people were already waiting: Ms. Langford from Human Resources and Dr. Singh from the Ethics Committee. Both smiled politely, which somehow made it worse. "Please have a seat," Ms. Langford said. On the table sat a manila folder. Clara recognized her own handwriting on some of the printed receipts visible through the plastic sleeve. "Mrs. Hayes," Dr. Singh began gently, "an anonymous report was submitted this morning concerning your relationship with Professor Ethan Cole." Clara's breath caught. "Relationship," she repeated, voice tight. Ms. Langford slid the folder toward her. These are copies of hotel invoices, meal reimbursements, and expense reports tied to both your university cards. Can you explain them? I don't understand. Clara stammered. Those were professional retreats. Dr. Singh glanced at the dates. Weekends. We were preparing for a conference. Together, her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she couldn't find the tone that usually saved her. Across the city, Robert sat in a diner with a window view of the courthouse. Marcus joined him, setting down a folder. "You're going to like this," he said. "Divorce and fraud filings are officially acknowledged. She'll be served by end of day." Robert stirred his coffee, watching the swirl of cream fade into brown. That fast, Marcus grinned. "You've given me a career's worth of leverage in a week." Robert nodded, satisfied. "Keep it quiet. Let the noise come from their side." At the university, the noise had already started. Ethan Cole was pacing his office phone pressed to his ear. "You told me no one knew." He hissed. Clara's voice came through weakly. "Someone sent HR everything. Emails, receipts, everything. Who, I don't know." Ethan rubbed his forehead. "They're suspending me pending investigation. I can't even access my campus account." "I'm being questioned too," she cried. "Then fix it, Clara. You're in HR. You have connections." "They're my connections, Ethan." "Not anymore." He hung up on her. By 3 p.m., whispers filled every hallway. "Did you hear Cole and Hayes?" "No way she's married." Apparently the husband found out. Someone in the faculty lounge pulled up the local news site. The headline read, "University investigates alleged misconduct between administrator and professor." No names yet, but the details were clear enough for anyone to guess. Robert saw the article that evening on his phone. He didn't smile. He didn't even finish reading it. He simply turned the screen off and looked out the diner window at the rain streaking down the glass. It wasn't triumph. It was inevitability. Marcus joined him again, setting down another envelope. "It's all in motion. The HR department's in chaos. The dean's demanding a report by tomorrow." Robert nodded. "Good. Let her feel what she made me feel." Scrutinized, dissected small. Marcus studied him carefully. "And Ethan? He'll fall harder. Men like him always do." That night, Ethan's faculty access was suspended. His inbox exploded with messages from students asking if the rumors were true. One of them screenshotted his automated reply. "Professor Cole is currently on administrative leave." The screenshot spread across the department group chat within an hour. By morning, the university board had issued a statement. "The institution has initiated a formal investigation into allegations of professional misconduct. Pending the review involved, parties will be relieved of their duties." Ethan's office door was locked by noon. Clara's name disappeared from the staff directory the next day. She packed her things in silence, every footstep echoing against the tile floor. The weight of the box in her arms felt heavier than it should have. As she walked to the parking lot, she caught her reflection in the glass, tired, older, unfamiliar. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Hayes," the voice said. "Yes, this is the King County Court Clerk. You've been listed in a petition for divorce and financial misconduct. You'll receive documents shortly." She stood there in the cold, the words hitting harder than any slap. When she whispered, "They've already been filed." The line disconnected. Robert received a message at almost the same moment. Marcus again, filed and served. Everything's official. He set the phone down, took a slow breath, and looked around the quiet cabin. Papers, folders, the last week of his life scattered across the desk. He gathered them all neatly into one pile and closed it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, streaks of pale sunlight slipping through. The world kept moving unbothered by human wreckage. He stood by the window mug, warming his hands, and whispered to no one in particular. They wanted excitement. Now they have exposure. Later that afternoon, he saw another headline: University faculty member resigns amid ethics scandal. Under it, smaller text: administrative official placed on leave, pending investigation. He didn't click the article. He didn't need to. He'd written this ending days ago. That night, he sat on the deck outside the cabin, listening to the wind moving through the pine trees. Somewhere across the city, Clara was packing her office and Ethan was emptying his desk. Everything they'd built on deceit was collapsing with the precision of a controlled demolition. He sipped his drink, the amber reflecting the firelight beside him. This wasn't rage. It wasn't gloating. It was order restored. He took a final breath of the cold night air, exhaled slowly, and said aloud, "They thought betrayal was power. But power's just patience with timing." The stars above were faint but steady, the kind of light that didn't need to shout to be seen. Robert leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet do the talking. 3 days after the university headlines broke, Robert walked back into Marcus Bell's office, carrying the same calm he'd worn since Christmas night. The city outside had thawed, streets slick with rain instead of snow. But the chill in the air matched his mood, measured, deliberate, finished. Marcus looked up from his desk. "You saw the paper, I didn't need to," Robert said, setting a folder down. "Everything's unfolding as expected. You're a scary man when you say things like that." Robert smiled faintly. "Scary men act out of anger. I'm just efficient." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Well, efficiency has its rewards." The board accepted Ethan's resignation. Clara's been officially terminated from HR. The dean's statement called it a violation of institutional ethics. That's bureaucratic code for get out quietly. Robert nodded. "Good. Let her experience silence from the other side for once." Marcus gestured toward the folder. "What's that?" "The next step." Inside were financial documents, joint accounts, mortgage statements, a detailed report Marcus had requested from the bank. Every page told the same story: withdrawals, transfers, and subtle manipulations that stretched back months. Clara hadn't just cheated in love. She'd tried to slowly bleed his future dry. "I want it all moved to the trust," Robert said. "Every remaining dollar, every asset. She won't touch a cent." Marcus flipped through the pages, eyebrows rising. "You've already reclaimed 90%. You really need the rest." "It's not about need," Robert said. "It's about closure." They worked quietly for the next hour, signing, stamping, scanning. Outside the city, traffic droned like a distant hum. When Marcus printed the final confirmation, he handed it across the desk. "It's done. You now control everything in your name, and the trust is airtight." Robert took the papers, folded them neatly. "And the house sold," Marcus said. "The buyer's payment cleared this morning. You'll get the confirmation email by evening." "Perfect." He stood and buttoned his coat. Marcus watched him for a moment before speaking. "You ever wonder if you went too far?" Robert turned to him. "You can't go too far when you're just taking back what's yours." On his way out, Robert stopped at the door. "Send the restitution plan through tomorrow. Include the VA funds she misused. I want her to see her signature on the repayment." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're asking her to pay restitution?" "No," Robert said. "The court is? I'm just reminding her consequences exist." That afternoon, Clara received a call from her attorney. Her world had been collapsing for a week, and now the floor gave way completely. Mrs. Hayes, the lawyer, said the court accepted Mr. Hayes' filing for financial recovery. "You'll need to comply with the restitution schedule." "Restitution," she repeated. "Yes, it concerns the misuse of your husband's VA benefits. It's technically federal property." Her stomach dropped. What happens if I don't pay? I strongly advise you not to test that option. After the call, Clara sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the boxes she still hadn't unpacked. The television in the background played a news report about the university scandal. She turned it off. Silence filled the room, thick and accusing. She reached for her phone and typed a message. "You win, Robert. Are you happy now?" She didn't send it. She deleted it, started another. "Can we at least talk? I don't have anywhere to go." That one she sent. It delivered. No reply came. Across town, Robert was sitting at a downtown cafe signing the last page of a legal packet. The waitress poured him another coffee, and he thanked her with a smile that actually reached his eyes this time. Marcus joined him 10 minutes later, coat damp from the rain. "She's been served," Marcus said, sliding into the seat opposite him. "Divorce finalized within 30 days if she doesn't contest. And from what I hear, she can't afford to." Robert nodded. "She'll learn what starting over really feels like." "Do you want to see her reaction when she gets the restitution notice?" "No," Robert said. "That's not my part anymore." Marcus studied him for a moment, then said quietly, "You're done then. I was done the night I changed the locks." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, the last spare to the house that no longer existed in his name. He set it on the table between them. "This used to mean home," he said. "Now it's just metal." Marcus nodded slowly. "So what now?" "Now," Robert said, "I disappear." That evening, rain slicked the streets in reflections of streetlights. Clara stood outside an ATM, inserting her card again and again, as if repetition could rewrite reality. Each time the screen blinked the same words, "Account restricted." "Contact bank." She pressed her lips together, biting back tears. When the card finally locked her out, she slammed her fist against the machine. Passers-by glanced her way, pitying, curious. She turned and walked quickly to her car, only to find the space empty. A bright yellow notice fluttered on the wet asphalt. Leased vehicle returned to owner. She stood in the rain, hair plastered to her face, reading the paper over and over until the ink began to bleed. Robert watched from across the street. He sat in his truck, headlights off, engine idling. Not stalking, just observing the last page of the story he'd written. She looked small under the streetlight, fragile even. For a brief second, a flicker of memory tugged at him. Laughter's Sunday mornings, a woman who had once loved him enough to make pancakes in his old t-shirt. Then the image faded. Marcus's voice echoed in his head. "You've got what you wanted?" And Robert's answer came back to him now, steady as ever. "No. I got what's fair." He waited until she walked away, before starting the engine. The windshield wipers brushed away the rain, clearing the view ahead. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing worth seeing behind him. By the time he reached his cabin, the night was quiet again. The fire flickered low in the hearth, casting soft light across the wooden walls. On the table sat the final set of documents Marcus had couriered over: property confirmations, restitution forms, divorce schedule. He signed the last one, folded it neatly, and placed it in the envelope. Outside, wind rippled across the lake, small waves glinting under the moon. He walked to the window and stared out. The reflection staring back was calm, older, unshaken. He whispered, "Checkmate." For a long time, he stood there watching the dark water. Not to gloat, not to savor victory, just to understand what peace sounded like. When he finally turned off the lights, the cabin sank into stillness. In that silence, he felt something he hadn't in months. Not triumph, not relief, but balance. He whispered to the empty room. The game was never about winning. It was about ending it right. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean. He opened the window slightly, letting the night breeze wash through. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang out faintly. 12 chimes, steady and slow. Robert Hayes closed his eyes, listening. Every sound, every breath, every quiet second was his again. And in that reclaimed silence, the man everyone thought had been broken finally allowed himself to exhale free, deliberate, and whole. The news spread faster than either of them could have imagined. By the end of the week, every teacher, administrator, and student at North Seattle University knew about the scandal. Some whispered it over lunch, others pretended to care about ethics and professionalism, but most just enjoyed the gossip. It was human nature watching other people's lives fall apart made them feel a little safer in their own. Robert saw the article headline on his phone that morning. Professor Cole resigns amid misconduct investigation. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The story had already served its purpose. The world finally saw the truth, and it no longer needed his hand to guide it. He placed the phone face down and poured another cup of coffee, the aroma filling the quiet cabin. Across the city, Ethan Cole's world was collapsing. The university board revoked his tenure, citing serious ethical violations. His pension was suspended pending legal review. The dean's office escorted him out with a box of his belongings, past students pretending not to stare. Someone recorded it on their phone. The video made it to Reddit within hours. Disgraced professor fired after affair with administrator. The comments below were ruthless. Ethan slammed the box onto the hood of his car, his jaw clenched, rain soaking through his jacket. His phone rang Clara. He hesitated before answering. "What do you want?" he snapped. "They fired me too," she said, voice cracking. "They said I violated policy. My name's everywhere, Ethan." He laughed bitterly. "You think this is about your name? You dragged me down with you. You were part of it, not anymore," he said. "Don't call me again." The line went dead. Clara stared at her reflection in the phone screen, the water streaking down her face, indistinguishable from tears. Robert folded the newspaper and tossed it aside. The fire crackled softly beside him. Marcus had told him everything that morning, how the HR department was flooded with requests for comment, how the board had cut both Clara and Ethan off completely. "They're radioactive," Marcus had said. "No one will touch them now." He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt clean. The kind of quiet that comes when every loose thread has finally been cut. Clara's parents weren't so composed. Margaret and Harold Whitmore had been pillars of their suburban community for decades. Garden parties, charity drives, Christmas gatherings. Now, their phone wouldn't stop ringing. Harold turned off the landline after the 5th reporter called. Margaret sat in silence at the dining table, the country club newsletter open to the page where her daughter's name used to appear under member spotlight. Clara knocked on their door that night, trembling in the cold. Margaret opened it, halfway eyes red. "Mom," Clara whispered. Her mother didn't move. "You've humiliated us. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Meaning doesn't undo consequences. From the living room, Harold's voice cut through. "We told you he was a good man. You threw him away for what? Some fantasy, Dad, please don't," he said sharply. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." The door closed. Robert sat by the lake the next morning, a thermos of coffee in hand. The surface of the water was still smooth as glass. The reflection of pine trees rippled slightly in the wind. He felt no urge to move, no rush of adrenaline, just stillness. Marcus arrived late in the afternoon, parking by the gravel path. "You've been quiet," he said, stepping out. "Noise never fixed anything," Robert replied. Marcus handed him an envelope. "Finalized decree. Divorce is official. She signed yesterday." Robert took it, running his fingers over the seal. "That fast?" She didn't contest, couldn't afford to. "What about restitution?" She agreed to it. "Court-ordered payments begin next month." Fi $231.90 monthly until the VA funds are restored. Robert nodded once. Appropriate? You're a machine, Marcus said quietly. Most people would want blood. Bloodstains, Robert said. Paperwork endures. They shared a small laugh, tired knowing. That evening, Clara sat alone in a one-bedroom apartment overlooking a parking lot. The hum of a refrigerator filled the silence. On the table sat a stack of unopened bills and the first notice from the bank, final warning delinquent account. She scrolled through social media on her cracked phone. Every post she saw was a reminder of who she used to be. Smiling photos from office parties, captions about empowerment, comments she'd once left on other people's scandals, self-righteous, judgmental. Now no one liked her posts. Most had unfriended her. Even her closest colleagues ignored her messages. She opened a blank status update and started typing. Sometimes good people make bad mistakes. Sometimes we lose ourselves before we realize what really matters. She attached a photo of herself by the window. Eyes red, expression soft. The comments came quickly. Stay strong. Everyone deserves forgiveness. A few heart emojis. For a moment, she felt comfort, like she could rewrite the story, rebrand herself as misunderstood. Then one new comment appeared from an anonymous account. Didn't you cheat on your husband while he was in the hospital? Using his disability money for your weekend trips. Curious if that's in your next post too. The thread exploded. Replies poured in, questions, accusations, screenshots from old articles, copies of public court documents. Within an hour, her post was flooded with people calling her names she'd never thought she'd hear directed at her. She tried deleting it, but screenshots spread faster than she could click. Robert sat by the fireplace, scrolling through the same post. He hadn't written the comment himself. Someone else had done it, maybe a stranger who pieced the story together from public filings. But he didn't stop it either. He watched the numbers climb, then set his phone aside. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Clara shut her laptop with a snap and pressed her hands over her face. The sobs came quietly at first, then louder, until she was gasping for air. The woman who had once held dinner parties, who had prided herself on control and image, now sat in the dark, surrounded by unpaid bills and cold pizza boxes. By midnight, the post was deleted. Her profile went private. The world moved on to another scandal. Marcus called Robert the next day. You saw it. I saw it. She's ruined online. She ruined herself, Robert said simply. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Then Robert said softly, You know what the difference is between revenge and justice, Marcus? What revenge is about hurting them, justice is about remembering who you are. He walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The air was crisp, the water calm, the sky streaked with the faint gold of dawn. Somewhere Clara was learning what it meant to be truly alone. Somewhere Ethan was rewriting his resume, pretending his fall had been circumstantial. Robert poured himself another coffee, the warmth seeping through the cup into his palms. The peace wasn't loud or triumphant. It was simple, earned. He took one last sip, set the cup down, and said quietly to himself, I didn't destroy them. I just stopped protecting them. Then he turned away from the window, leaving the past where it belonged in the silence behind him. The city disappeared behind him in the rearview mirror, its skyline fading into a dull gray strip under the clouds. Robert drove south with the heater low, and the window cracked the kind of cold air that kept him awake. The radio was off. The only sound was the tires humming on the wet highway and the quiet rhythm of his own breath. The map on his dashboard didn't matter. He wasn't following directions, just distance. By noon, the concrete turned to forest, then to open hills. He crossed the Oregon border as rain gave way to sleet, the kind that painted the trees in thin sheets of glass. When he finally pulled off onto a gravel road, the world had gone silent again. At the end of the path stood a small wooden cabin by a lake. Nothing impressive, just 2 rooms, a porch, and a chimney still stained with old smoke. He stepped out of the truck boots, sinking slightly into the mud, and inhaled the sharp scent of pine and cold water. The quiet hit him harder than he expected. For the first time in months, maybe years, no one wanted anything from him. No deadlines, no betrayal, no waiting for the next shoe to drop. He unlocked the cabin, pushed the door open, and was met by still air and dust. Everything was as he remembered from years ago, the same couch with its uneven leg, the same table he'd built back when woodworking had been a hobby instead of therapy. He set his bag down and stood there for a long moment, listening to the creaks of old timber settle around him. Outside, the lake shimmered under the pale light. He made coffee on the old gas stove sat by the window and watched the wind disturb the water in slow ripples. It felt strange to realize he had nowhere else to be. For the first time since the hospital, he wasn't recovering, he was living. By afternoon, he had unpacked the essentials and swept the floor. He found an old radio tucked behind a shelf, turned the dial until it caught a local station. A woman's voice spoke softly about road closures and weekend storms. Normal things, life going on. He poured another cup of coffee and took it outside. The wooden deck creaked under his weight. Across the lake, a single duck floated through the reflection of the clouds. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "This will do." The next morning he woke before sunrise. Old habits. The mist hung low across the water. He slipped on his jacket and walked down to the edge of the lake, fishing rod in hand. The air was cold enough to sting his nose, but he didn't mind. He didn't even bother baiting the hook properly. The point wasn't to catch anything. The point was to stand still. As the light broke over the hills, he realized how much of his life had been spent in noise, people, traffic, arguments, plans. Here every sound was honest. Wind, birds, the soft creak of the dock underfoot. When he reeled in the empty line, he smiled to himself. "Good enough," he said aloud. Later that day, Marcus called. "You still alive out there?" Robert chuckled. "Barely. The Wi-Fi is a rumor. You sound better." "I am better. You planning to come back?" "Not yet," Robert said. "There's work to do here." That work wasn't his engineering firm. It was something else, something cleaner. A week earlier, he and Marcus had finalized the creation of a non-profit, the Hayes Foundation. Its purpose was simple legal and financial aid for veterans blindsided by divorce, debt, or betrayal. Funded partly by donations and partly by the restitution payments Clara now made every month. Marcus had teased him for it, turning revenge money into charity. "That's poetic?" "It's productive," Robert had replied. "Pain's only useful if it builds something." He received the first transfer 2 days after moving to the cabin. $5,231.90, Clara's first installment. He opened the banking app, saw the number appear under the foundation account, and closed it without a second thought. The money wasn't his to keep. It was purpose, not payment. In the afternoons, he volunteered at the small VA center 20 minutes away. Nothing official, just helping other veterans fill out forms, check their benefits, or find housing options. Most of them didn't know who he was. He preferred it that way. One of them, a young man with scars across his cheek, told him, "You talk like you've seen everything." Robert smiled. Not everything. Just enough to know what's worth fixing. He returned to the cabin each evening, smelling of cold air and old coffee, his shoulders lighter. He'd cook simple meals, pasta, eggs, whatever he could manage, and sit by the fire until the logs burned low. Sometimes he wrote in a notebook, small things. Don't waste quiet moments. Revenge ends when you stop looking backward. Forgiveness isn't surrender, it's release. One night he opened the window wide and listened to the wind rush through the trees. Somewhere in the dark, a branch snapped and fell into the lake. The splash echoed brief and clean. He whispered, That's all it takes. Let go fall and start again. A week later, Marcus drove up for a visit. He found Robert splitting wood outside, sleeves rolled sawdust on his hands. "Christ," Marcus said. Stepping out of his car, "You look like you belong here." "Maybe I do," Robert said. "Coffee's inside." They sat on the porch as the sun set. Marcus looked out at the lake. "You ever miss her?" Robert considered the question. "I don't miss her. I miss who I thought she was." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's fair." "She taught me something, though," Robert added. "About control. I thought power was money or authority. But it's actually peace. The ability to sit still and not owe anyone an explanation." They talked until the stars came out about everything and nothing. When Marcus left, he clapped Robert on the shoulder. "Don't disappear completely, old man." "I won't," Robert said. "But I'm done being found." That night he walked down to the lake again. The water reflected the moon, perfectly calm, unbroken. He crouched at the edge and dipped his fingers in. The cold bit at his skin, grounding him. In the reflection, he didn't see the man who'd been betrayed or the man who'd orchestrated a quiet war. He saw someone else, someone who had outlasted it. He whispered to the water, "You don't heal by winning. You heal by leaving." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. He looked toward the cabin and smiled. Tomorrow he'd visit the VA center again, check the mail, maybe fix the porch railing. Small things. Ordinary things. As he walked back, the moonlight traced his path through the pines. The cabin windows glowed faintly ahead, waiting for him. When he reached the porch, he paused, listening to the faint hum of the lake behind him. The night was quiet, perfect, alive. Robert Hayes opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it softly behind him. The sound of the latch echoed through the empty space, gentle and final, the sound of a man who had finally locked the world out, not from fear, but from peace. It was the first knock on his door in almost 3 months. Robert froze, mug halfway to his lips, the fire crackling quietly behind him. Nobody ever came out this far. The road to the cabin ended in gravel and silence. He set the mug down and listened. 3 more knocks, soft, hesitant. When he opened the door, the winter air rushed in, cold and sharp. Clara stood there. Her face was thinner pale under the gray sky hair pulled back without care. She clutched a manila envelope in both hands like it was armor. "Hi, Robert," she said quietly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind through the trees filled the space between them. "You found me," he said finally. "It wasn't hard," she said. "Marcus told me." He sighed, stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze." She hesitated before crossing the threshold, eyes sweeping over the cabin's simplicity, wooden walls, stacks of books, the quiet hum of a kettle on the stove. "You really disappeared?" she said softly. "Not disappeared," Robert corrected. "Just stopped answering." She gave a small, fragile smile. "That sounds like you." He poured her a cup of coffee, handed it across the table. She wrapped her hands around it, grateful for the warmth. For a moment, neither knew where to start. "I heard about the foundation," she said finally. "The one you started? The veterans thing?" He nodded. "It's doing all right. That's good," she said, eyes down. "You always needed something to fix." Robert sat opposite her, expression calm. "What are you doing here, Clara?" She took a breath, the kind that precedes something rehearsed. "I came to give you this." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a receipt, proof of restitution payment, her signature at the bottom. "It's the first full year. The court said I didn't have to deliver it personally, but..." Her voice faltered. "I needed to." He looked at it, but didn't touch it. "You could have mailed it, I know," she said. "But I didn't come for the paperwork." He waited. She looked around the cabin again, then met his eyes. "I came to say, I'm sorry." The words hung there, heavy and strange. For a long time they just sat in the air like a bird, unsure where to land. Robert leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Sorry," he repeated quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said quickly. "I just needed to say it out loud. What I did to you, it wasn't just an affair. It was cruel. I used you. I lied. And you didn't deserve any of it." Her voice trembled, but he didn't interrupt. "I lost everything," she continued. "My job, my reputation, my friends. Even my parents won't talk to me. But none of that hurt like knowing I was the reason you stopped smiling." He looked away toward the fire. "I stopped smiling because I was exhausted," he said simply. "Not because of you. You were just the last straw." She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I know I can't undo any of it. But I thought maybe if you saw me like this, if you knew I wasn't hiding anymore, you'd believe that I've changed." Robert's gaze softened slightly. "Change doesn't erase the past, Clara. It just stops it from repeating." "I know," she whispered. "But I still needed to face you once, even if it hurts." Silence fell between them again, longer this time. The fire popped. The clock ticked faintly on the shelf. Finally, Robert spoke, his tone calm, but not unkind. "Do you remember the night I came home from the hospital?" Clara nodded slowly. "I walked in expecting dinner. You were laughing with someone else." "I remember," she said, voice breaking. "I didn't say a word," he continued. "Didn't shout. Didn't ask why. Just walked away. That moment taught me something." He paused. "Love isn't the opposite of hate. It's clarity. Once you see the truth, you stop fighting for the illusion." Clara wiped her eyes. "You were always better at words?" "I had to be," he said. "They were all I had left." She stood then, moving closer to the fireplace. "Do you hate me, Robert?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I did, for a while. But hate's heavy. You carry it long enough, it starts feeling like home. I decided to set it down." She turned to face him. "Then, what do you feel now?" He thought for a long time before answering. "Peace." The word hit her harder than anger ever could. She nodded slowly, biting her lip to keep from crying again. "You really did let go," she whispered. "I had to," he said. "You can't heal while you're still explaining your scars." She placed the empty mug on the table, her fingers trembling. "I won't bother you again." He nodded. "You won't." At the door, she hesitated. "You know," she said, voice soft, "when I first met you, I thought your silence made you weak. I thought you didn't know how to fight. But you were just saving your strength for when it mattered." He met her gaze, eyes calm. "It never mattered to me who won, Clara. Only who walked away." She swallowed hard, then said, "Thank you for letting me say this." "You didn't need my permission," he replied. For a moment she almost smiled. Then she opened the door. The wind swept in, scattering a few papers from the table. She turned once more to look at him, older, steadier, untouchable, and whispered, "Goodbye, Robert." He watched her walk down the path until she disappeared into the trees. The echo of her footsteps faded, replaced by the sound of the lake moving softly in the distance. He closed the door quietly and leaned against it, eyes closed not from pain, but relief. For a while he just stood there, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and cold air. Then he went back to the table, folded the receipt she'd brought, and slid it into a drawer with the rest of the foundation's documents. The fire had burned low. He added another log and sat beside it, the warmth washing over him. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying away the last traces of her voice. He stared into the flames and murmured, You can forgive someone without inviting them back into your life. The clock ticked on. The cabin settled into its familiar quiet. Robert picked up his notebook from the mantel and wrote a single line. She came back, but I didn't. He closed it gently, placed it beside the lamp, and leaned back in the chair. The flames reflected in his eyes, steady and unwavering. Somewhere beyond the lake, an owl called into the night. The sound was soft, distant, and free, just like him. The lake was still when morning came, the kind of stillness that held its own gravity. Robert sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the fog curl off the water. A year ago, he'd woken in a hospital bed surrounded by fluorescent lights and the echo of machines. Now he woke to silence and the sound of a loon calling from the far shore. He smiled faintly. The world had found its balance again. He opened his worn notebook, the same one he'd carried since the first day he'd left Seattle, and wrote across the top of a fresh page, Day 365. Beneath it, he added, "Freedom tastes like coffee and cold air." Inside the cabin, the fireplace hissed softly, the wood crackling as it burned. He poured another cup, leaned back in the chair, and thought of the long road behind him, the hospital, the betrayal, the endless nights of plans and paperwork. It all felt distant now, like the memory of someone else's story. The scars had faded, not just on his chest, but in the quiet corners of his mind. He set the mug down and walked to the edge of the dock. The reflection staring back at him in the lake's surface was older, but clearer. He didn't see the man who'd lost everything. He saw the man who'd chosen to rebuild. At 10 o'clock, Marcus's name flashed on his phone. "You sound awake," Marcus said when Robert answered. "I've been awake for a year," Robert replied. Marcus chuckled. "I read the new report. The Foundation's doing good work." "You know that, right?" "I know," Robert said. "It's the best thing to come out of all of it. 50 veterans assisted this quarter. That's no small number." Robert nodded. Pain's a powerful investment when you put it in the right place. They talked about logistics, the next funding cycle, the new office downtown, the lawyer who'd offered to handle pro bono cases. When they hung up, Robert sat there for a moment, looking out at the lake again. The water shimmered under the sun. It wasn't redemption that moved him anymore. It was peace. Later that afternoon, he walked to the post office in the small town nearby. The clerk recognized him by now, nodding with a warm smile. "Got another thank you letter, Mr. Hayes," she said, handing him an envelope. Back at the cabin, he opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman in Spokane. Her husband, a retired Marine, had been evicted last winter. The Foundation had helped them find housing and legal aid. The letter ended simply, "You saved us without even knowing our names." Robert folded it neatly and placed it in a wooden box beside his desk. One of many letters that had arrived over the past few months. Every time he opened that box, he remembered why he'd chosen peace over punishment. At sunset, he walked down the trail behind the cabin. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. He reached the old wooden bench that faced the lake and sat down, notebook in hand. The pages were filled now. Notes, thoughts, fragments of what had once been anger, but had turned into understanding. He flipped to the first page where his handwriting was still jagged and uneven. "Don't react. Prepare." On the last page, he wrote slowly, deliberately, "Revenge builds walls. Peace builds doors." The sun sank behind the ridge, the light spreading in golden streaks across the water. He could almost hear Clara's voice again, the apology, the trembling words at his door. But the ache that once followed her name was gone. He didn't hate her, and he didn't love her. She was simply part of the story that had led him here. He spoke softly to the horizon. "I hope she found something worth keeping." The air cooled as twilight deepened. He stood stretched and walked back toward the cabin. On the porch, The light above the door flickered on, automatically casting a soft glow over the wooden steps. He smiled at the simple design, predictable, reliable, nothing left to chance. Inside, he turned on the small radio by the counter. A familiar song was playing, one he hadn't heard in years. The singer's voice was soft, older now, singing about forgiveness. Robert poured himself a final cup of coffee and let the words fill the room. He sat at the table, opened his laptop, and began typing an update for the Foundation's website. This past year has reminded me that strength isn't about resistance, it's about recovery. The storms come, but so does the stillness after. What matters is what we do with the silence. He paused, then added one last line. If you're reading this and carrying something heavy, remember you don't have to burn down their house. You just have to stop letting them live in yours. He hit save, closed the laptop, and leaned back. The clock ticked softly beside him. Outside, the first stars blinked awake. The reflection of their light rippled across the lake, soft and silver. Robert stood, walked to the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The night air wrapped around him, cool and clean. He thought of the year behind him, the chaos, the precision, the silence that followed. He realized then that closure wasn't something you chased. It was something you chose. He whispered to the empty lake. It's over. Not as a declaration, but as a truth. And it was. He turned back toward the cabin, the warm light spilling from the window onto the porch. The world didn't need his revenge anymore. It had already done its work. All that was left was to live. He sat down in his chair again, notebook open to the final page, and wrote the last line he'd ever added to it. Healing doesn't start when they say sorry. It starts when you stop waiting for it. He set the pen down and closed the cover. For a moment he listened to the wind, the quiet rush of water, the hum of the fire inside. Then he smiled, faint and real. The lake was calm, the stars steady. He raised his mug slightly toward the night and said, "To the silence that saved me." Then he took a slow sip, let the warmth fill his chest, and sat there alone, content and completely free.